My name is Bryn Oram, and I work at the Greater Madison Writing Project at UW-Madison, and I'm presenting today with my colleague Mark Jageets, who works with me at UW for the Greater Madison Writing Project. If you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat your name and role, and maybe why you showed up today to this session, we'd love to see that just as people are coming in. I'm going to start doing a share screen right now. So hopefully everyone can see that. All right. So today we are excited to talk with everyone about youth and adult partnerships. So we're going to cover a couple of different topics from definitions and overview of the framework. And we are also really lucky to have a couple of voices from the field, people working with youth and adult partnerships in different capacities, both in and out of schools. We'll have some time for small group discussion. You can chat with some of the other participants and then a closing. So we are from the Writing Project, so it wouldn't be right if we didn't start with just a short write-in. And so we have a couple of prompts here, and we're really just going to take 2 minutes to jot down some thoughts wherever that's convenient for you in a document or a notebook. But to sort of bring us into the work today, we'd love for you to take a moment to think about why you are interested in learning more about youth and adult partnerships and what motivates you to create more pathways and partnerships for youth to take on leadership and decision-making roles. So we'll just set a timer for about 2 minutes and then we'll come back together. All right, if you want to finish up that thought that you're on, we'll come back together.
And as you're wrapping up that last thought on that, we just invite you to really hold on to those grounding thoughts for yourselves, keep them close to you and in mind as you sort of move through this session with us today. We'll invite you to share a bit about those and really think about those in terms of guiding questions and intentions for yourself when we get into some breakout rooms, and return to them at the end a little bit and think about, hopefully, that the session has helped you think differently, opened your eyes to some different aspects of it, or sort of built some thinking and spaces for you around that as we get through the day. So as we think about this for writing, to ask you to invite you to write into sort of the why for yourselves, we want to do the same for us. And when we think about youth and adult partnerships, for us, it really starts with this fundamental belief in young people as capable, competent, and interested in making sense of and contributing to their world and the world around them and at large. And as we think about this, this particularly, we find ourselves as former teachers in school settings, and that's where our work is, and really wanted to push forward with this idea of education and schooling not being simply things that are done, for or to young people, but that are done with and alongside young people. And so we want to really hold up this idea of youth as being capable, having something to say, and being taken seriously. And as doctors Gloria Ladson-Billings and Shep Zeldin remind us, it's particularly important to listen to those who are closest to and most impacted by systems, especially those systems that can be oppressive or limiting. And we really need to make sure that youth are heard, recognized, and authentically included in the process of change and revision.
So it's good to start with definitions. And so we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. And so on the screen is our working definition of youth and adult partnerships. Shep Zeldin, whose work is, whose research is a big part of our understanding about youth and adult partnerships, often describes these partnerships as youth and adults working together on things that matter. And I think that's as good a definition of any to move forward with. Because youth and adult partnerships happen in a variety of places, they may take on different areas of work or opportunities, but at their core, that's how we want to think about youth and adult partnerships, as opportunities to create change, work together, bridging the gap between youth and adults. A couple of things to keep in mind about what makes for youth and adult partnership. And these are kind of some descriptors that we think of as the core ingredients. So a couple of things I just want to lift up from this list that's here is that we often talk a lot about youth voice, and we'll talk a lot about youth voice today. We think youth voice is really important, but we all know that voice alone is not partnership. The partnership is really about engagement and power sharing, and engagement in decision making. So it's also important to recognize that in youth and adult partnerships, or otherwise, that youth and adults don't have equal power. And so the aim of YAP is to allocate real power and influential roles amongst diverse people, including those of different ages. So when all members of the community have opportunities to consistently participate in ways that fully utilize their strengths, power hierarchies become flattened. And that's when we see some really exciting impacts. So we're going to talk about some specific examples, but before we get there, in different organizations, youth adult partnerships take shape in different spaces. And so there's a list here of sort of opportunities that may be places where youth and adult partnership could take place in your organization, or in those of organizations that you work with. It's not necessarily important that there is like one special place for youth and adult partnerships, but that where we bring in youth to partner with adults on work that matters, that they're actually working on things that matter. So minor issues, superficial pieces don't really yield the positive impact for youth, adults, or the organization. But bringing young people in to work on real issues, real projects, to solve real problems in any of these categories is what we're hoping for.
And we'd also like to talk a little bit about what happens when these youth and adult partnerships exist and flourish. And so thinking about the positive impacts for youth, we know that through the research that we see better school performance, more positive self-concept, relationship with peers. And it really comes down to, in many ways, the things shared here on this slide, that youth feel a sense of belonging and connectedness in a new way. And one of the things that does is really moves from this idea of engagement to empowerment, and really thinking about youth having a greater sense of ownership of their work, of their expertise, and their contributions. As well as really thinking about a better and deeper awareness in terms of sort of self in relation to structures of power. And through that sort of deeper understanding of relationships of power, also the ability to enact change in community organizations. As we move on to thinking about the positive aspects of this youth and adult partnerships, one of the things we want to recognize is that this isn't just about youth and the benefits, but the benefits also to the adults in the partnerships and the organizations. And so one of the things that we know is, excuse me, that this enhances the ability of adults to make commitments to youth. It is something that particularly builds in terms of satisfaction for adults, in terms of their connection to the organization and youth. It helps address some of the negative stereotypes. We'll see a slide in just a minute that is a favorite of a young person and an older person, with some recognition of ask old people, they know things, ask young people, they know things, right? Really brings together these pieces of what we each bring to this, as Bryn is saying. And not only does it have a positive impact on the particular work that's happening, but it has a particular impact on adults and their ability to advocate for continued youth participation in authentic and meaningful ways going forward in terms of the organization and systems. So we'll talk a little bit about impacts on youth. We talk a little bit about impacts on excuse me, adults. And there's also the organizational and community impacts. And so when we think about this, when youth and adults work together, organization and communities get stronger, the capacity expands, and they're better able to provide necessary opportunities and supports for youth. So we see authentic and meaningful youth participation, collaboration, partnerships that becomes the norm rather than the exception. And so instead of asking, like, where can we insert youth voice? It becomes a question of, why isn't youth voice here? Why aren't youth partners with us in more authentic ways? Because it's the norm and what we're used to. The focus of the organization communities better reflect the needs, the interests, concerns, and priorities of youth and everyone else involved. And we see partnerships, collaborations, and connections that become more expansive and diverse. So with that, we want to move into some discussion about specific examples.
So as we are, a lot of us here from DPI, it's definitely important that we are able to think about what youth adult partnerships means in schools. And so a lot of the research on youth and adult partnerships does come from organizations that are more in community settings. But there's been some research done here locally that studied youth and adult partnerships impact on student learning in a school setting. So we found that youth and adult partnerships shows direct benefits to student learning. Students who experienced high voice were more likely to be cognitively engaged in their schoolwork, but when students also perceived that their teachers had created a sense of safety and supportive relationships, they also experienced high level of emotional connection and mattering, which contributed even more to engagement in schoolwork. Youth adult partnerships in schools can take many different forms, including curriculum redesign, classroom practices, discipline policies, school and community collaborations. So there's lots of opportunity to bring youth into decision making within their schools. There's my favorite picture. So drink it in while it's here. We want to pivot a little bit to bring in a couple of guests who are here to talk about their experiences from using youth adult partnerships frameworks in their school and out of school experiences. And so first, we are really pleased to have with us Jill Gartner. Jill's the principal at Clark Street Community School in Middleton, Wisconsin. And Clark Street is unique in many ways, one of which is that it was designed with youth and adult partnerships in mind. So we're happy to hear from Jill and for her to really be able to speak to us from the perspective of a school leader who can consider what administrators can be doing to support youth and adult partnerships in their own organizations.
Thank you, Bryn and Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. As Bryn said, I am Jill Gartner. I'm the principal of Clark Street Community School. We are in our 9th year as a instrumentality charter school in the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District. And our mission is to democratically cultivate a community of engaged learners and to serve as a resource for other educators and a catalyst for reform within the education system. So as Bryn mentioned, we started working with Dr. Zeldin and looking at youth adult partnerships from the very beginning of our formation. And Bettina Love's book that came out recently, We Want to Do More Than Just Survive. She has a line in there that says, education can't save us, we need to save education. And for me, that encapsulates both the big idea of Clark Street and the power of youth adult partnerships in education. Because I think no bigger amazing problem or opportunity, as I like to talk about, is there than actually getting youth and adults working together to reform education in a way that truly does repay the educational debt, as Clary Lansing-Billings challenges us to do. So we have kind of taken this youth adult partnership at the very high level of really trying to work together to redesign education in a way that is truly deeply engaging, but also in small pieces. So we have interdisciplinary seminars are things that we offer. And so we have students who work with teachers to design seminars and teach seminars to their peers. Students have lots and lots of opportunities to engage in projects that are very meaningful to them and work with adults to bring those to fruition. So the two things that Mark and Bryn asked me to kind of highlight and talk about were what do school leaders need to do to create the conditions and what would be kind of entry places. So as I think about the importance of leadership in doing this work, I think it's really important to think through the power dynamics that already exist in schools and to be very cognizant of the fact that the typical expectations for many people in schools is that the adults are the experts and the students are there to learn from the adults. And so I think more than anything, starting as a leader with making that mind shift to this is really about fully honoring that every learner comes to us with incredible value and that our job as educators is to tap into that value and to really try to, jump into that learning pit with them, as Loretta Hammond talks about, to help them engage deeply and meaningfully as a learner. And so starting with rethinking that power dynamic and being very aware of the spaces that that lives within schools, I think is probably the most critical first step for a leader. The research that Dr. Zeldin and others have done talks a lot about how critically important it is that you are not approaching the work of youth adult partnerships from a lens of youth as the target. And I think that is really counterintuitive for us as educators, because of course that's what we're supposed to be doing, is helping young people learn and helping young people succeed. But the power in youth adult partnerships is that it is the problem space or the challenge that you are working on together that's the target. And it's youth and adults coming together to work on that, which brings the power of the partnership. And I argue really, really brings the rich learning opportunities for students. So I think it's incredibly important that leaders think about the training that takes and the support and the resources that takes to be very to be clear on the expectations that this is a changed role for adults and it's a changed role for students, and that's something that needs sustained support and thought and resources committed to it. I think there's also some very interesting research that has come out of community organizations, also out of University of Wisconsin. Bianca Baldrich has done some very interesting research related to adult efficacy and adult agency, and how critically important it is that your adults have a sense of agency themselves. Because if you're looking to create empowering relationships and your adults don't feel as if they have agency or that they are empowered, it is very difficult for them to work in partnership with youth because they're coming from this scarcity mentality. So really being thoughtful about making sure that the adults within the system have a sense of efficacy and agency as well. And then probably the final big thing from a leadership perspective is just being, Bryn talked earlier about the fact that, right, the power dynamics are real, and they're not, this isn't a totally flat hierarchy. Those are going to exist, and certainly within schools there are very real limitations to what we can and can't do in those spaces. And so having clarity on that, making sure that the opportunities that you're presenting for youth and adult partnerships are true opportunities, that they have the opportunity to do authentic work, and that when there are limits, that you're clear and transparent about the limits that exist, so that the partnership can really work from a space of success. As far as entry points, relationships. Everything starts with relationships. If you are in a school environment that does not currently honor the value of every individual within the system, that doesn't value the intentional creating of community and development of social emotional needs, that has to be the first step. Has to be the first step to create that community of care and that shared sense of efficacy within the building before you start actually tackling any particular problems. And then really making sure that there is meaningful work. Bryn highlighted that earlier, that idea that just you doing things that they're low level is not going to get the results. And in fact, in some cases might actually get negative results because youth don't feel as if the work that they're doing is valued. So making sure that there really is truly meaningful work that can be done, and that the learning is in the process. Sometimes we make the mistake in schools of trying to structure things so much to ensure that we have the outcome that we deem is successful, or this perfect outcome that we're looking for, that we actually undermine the learning value and all that can be learned from just a messy, sloppy process that will result in whatever it results in, and that we really honor that it's that process that is clearly where the learning takes place.
Thank you so much, Jill. I so appreciate all that you shared there. The connection to, that if we want adults to be in this space, they have to enter this as engaged learners themselves, that we have to be thinking about empowerment for everybody in this, and that we have to enter into this space very thoughtfully, as this isn't something for youth, but this is something for all of us. This is something with all of us. And especially that bit there of, the sort of chunk on like things that look successful in schools, like we want a thing that we can show off sometimes. And that isn't always necessarily a very good measure of successful learning, but more of a successful end product. So thank you so much for all of that. We're now going to get a chance to hear from Zoe. Zoe's an alumni of our very first Rise Up and Write Youth Advocacy Workshop, which is a 2-week summer youth advocacy writing workshop. Zoe has gone on to be a mentor for new Rise Up and Write youth, and is also a graduate of Clark Street Community School. We're really excited to have Zoe because we think she brings a particularly unique perspective as a young activist who has navigated traditional schools, Clark Street, and out of school learning opportunities that are really grounded in youth and adult partnerships. So Zoe, welcome, and we're really excited to hear from you.
Oh, hi. So I think what makes Rise Up and Write really different is that it was all about collaboration. Individually, we were all researchers, but collectively, we were passionate learners and change makers. And youth adult partnerships were crucial to the Rise Up and Write model. We had facilitators, educators who weren't focused on delivering a strict set of curriculum, but rather exposing us to a wide variety of content and resources that we could use to develop our own projects. They presented us with the tools that we needed to share our voices and then stepped back to let us work, but we're always nearby to assist and bounce ideas off of. And I think that's super important. And I know that a lot of the key factors that I experienced at Rise Up and Write are ones that I've seen at Clark Street as a Clark Street student, and I know they work. Obviously very biased, but yeah, I think it's just having work that is meaningful to youth is super important. So that's why project-based learning works, and that's why Rise Up and Write works, because we could all dive into our own, niche areas of interest, but then come back together and share what we've learned and see how our work intersected and how we could work together and how we could aid each other's work. And I think that goes for both youth and adults. We were all learning together. It wasn't anyone knows, more than anyone else. We all have our specialties and our expertise, and we all have things to bring to the table. Yeah, and I think in revisioning school spaces and experiences, I'd like to see classrooms create the same sense of community that I experienced at Rise Up and Write and at Clark Street, where we have a space that is safe to learn, grow, and share, and that we can learn in tandem. And like, Brandon Mark said earlier, that fosters engagement on both ends of that partnership.
Thank you so much, Zoe. One of the things I was really drawn to in what you said is that at Rise Up and Write, everyone's knowledge is valuable. There's not a sort of traditional dynamic of adults as the holders of knowledge and the holders of all of the directions of exactly what you should do, but that adults work as facilitators to support young people in pursuing the things that they're interested in. So obviously we know there's differences between out of school spaces and school spaces, but also a lot that both of our places can learn from one another. So thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. Next up, we are going to hear from a teacher in Madison, Liz Mells. And Liz has been a part of a Greater Madison Writing Project year-long institute designed to respond to and come out of the pandemic in a better place, appropriately called What We Can Become. And so Liz is one of 20 teachers who has worked with Mark and I throughout the year, starting last summer, to co-create what we call design principles for culturally sustaining learning partnerships, which are heavily influenced by the work and research around youth and adult partnerships. Liz couldn't be here with us today synchronously because she's teaching, as teachers do on Friday afternoons. But she made a video that we're going to share with you where she talks a little bit about how she has worked this year to intentionally design classroom activities and experiences that are designed in mind for partnership with her students. Also important to remember that there's a pandemic and she's been teaching virtually all year. So just like all of us, as everything has been challenging, working to build partnerships over Zoom or Google Classroom has definitely added a layer of challenge to Liz's work. I just want to mention, and I will drop into the chat, Liz references a couple of different things when she's talking. Two books that were influential to her work, in addition to the design principles for culturally sustaining learning partnerships. A Google Doc of those design principles will be in the chat for you to take a peek at. And we are going to just hear a couple of clips from Liz. And I'm going to turn up my volume and hope that this works. So Liz is going to start off talking about co-creation of two different activities in her classroom. The first one is social contracts, and the second one is a co-created rubric. And then I'm going to pause her and jump ahead a little bit to one more topic that I'd love for you to hear from her. So here we go. Mark, if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
Designing for youth partnerships, I'll kind of dive into that. I really focused on valuing student voice, valuing, validating, honoring, including, right? So trying to have a space where students feel comfortable and a focus on the community. And so when I think about the first way that I start to design our classroom space with partnerships in mind, my social contract is like day one. So I view the social contract, which I've received lots of professional development on, right? There's capturing kids' hearts, there's developmental designs, norms, whatever you want to call them. This idea of students having voice in how we want to behave and how we want our classroom space to feel, and what should we do when there's a conflict. So I start the year with some pretty extensive social contract development. And when I found out we were going virtual, that was the first thing I had to adjust, right? How am I going to make my social contract virtual, especially when we've never had virtual classrooms before? So honoring student voice and asking them to share their thoughts, and then creating something that only exists because of that group of students. And I talk about it like that, right? Like, look at our social contract that only exists because of you and your voice and what you added. So every social contract is different for each class that I teach. And I view it as a success if the social contract has some sort of silliness or inside joke on it, right? So something that the students might reference or know that is special to our classroom space. I'm currently writing a piece on that, so it's fresh in my mind, and maybe Mark and Bryn will be able to share our website and our further resources, but I've been thinking about social contracts and how they're really kind of laying the foundation for my youth partnerships and how I approach the year. So other activities that I've done kind of this year, I focused a lot on the co-creation element, and I've had some good success really of going into how would I change things where students are partners. So I think kind of the first step is looking for those opportunities where student voice can be included, and where we could be partners in the co-creation of the curriculum, of the experience, right, of the assessment. So sometimes this year I've had a unit in mind and students have come into play for the rubric creation. And I tried this out in the fall, and part of that, as I mentioned, was pulling from the 2 books and looking at, you know, ways teachers have co-created rubrics in the past and how did I want to do it? What was that going to look like? And the strength of it, right? So the success is that the rubrics that I've created this year have been the best I've ever used. They have student voice and student language, right? We talk a lot about making rubrics student friendly or student facing. And when you ask them, how should you be assessed for X component? And they say it back to you and you use it in their words, student voice, right? It's an extremely student friendly rubric. And you can go a little bit further and say, well, what does that look like? What does this mean, right? And really ask them to define those elements. So the rubrics that we have, I had a little bit of growing pains of trying to figure out, and the students got to see that vulnerability of, okay, I started with this and now you'll see it looks totally different. It was fun. Right. It worked in our virtual space, and we slowed things down to really talk about what makes sense here and how should you be assessed. Kind of on the same topic, right? The biggest maybe struggle was that students aren't used to being included as partners. So when I asked for feedback on, hey, how did this rubric creation process go? Like, what did we do well? What would you change? I had a handful of students say, you know, it was nice, it was fun, or I really appreciated it, but I kind of just want you to tell me what I'm supposed to do. So that was a message that I saw a couple times where students, I don't know if it's easier or it's more familiar, but they're used to just to checking off the boxes that are the Miss Mel's expectations. So that was eye-opening to say, ooh, right? Like, I know why you're saying that, right? The system is comfortable and it's familiar to just be told what to do. And maybe they didn't quite see the rubric creation process yet as an opportunity for growth, right? Like being able to talk about elements of their writing or of their work, that's an advanced skill. So I think there will continue to be some growing pains with that.
All right, I'm going to pause Liz there. And I just wanted to lift up a couple of things that I think are really important in her reflection. One is that, and if you know Liz, you would always know that she is readily able to tell you the things that aren't working about what she's trying to do. And so her acknowledgement, I think, is really important that when she started this, a lot of kids didn't necessarily want to participate in writing their own rubric. They just wanted to do what she wanted them to do, which is kind of the deal that students make with teachers in a lot of ways. And so bringing in youth adult partnerships was really changing the game on her students, and they didn't know how to react. A lot of times when we start youth adult partnerships, we've been thinking about it as adults for a long time. And then we go to kick off and we assume that that young people will be just as excited as we are, and they're not, because they haven't done the same kind of thinking about it. They have lived in a structure where adults have all the control and all the power, and they don't really know how to participate yet. I can say from experience, it doesn't take very long for students to find their way in participation. But that Liz's experience is not an uncommon one, and it's one to be prepared for. That often happens at the beginning. The other thing I just wanted to lift up of what Liz said is her sign of success for her social contracts is that there's silliness built into it. And I think that's such a great sign of celebration and community that are integral for beginning a project with any group of people. And definitely it should be signs of success for all of us as we move forward into youth adult partnerships work. This is joyful, fun work, and we should see evidence of that for all participants.
Yeah, just one last thing I wanted to connect with that is building on what Brennan just mentioned about the Liz talking about sort of the hesitancy of students to go into this, because it is a vulnerable position for students. And it really draws me back to something Jill mentioned earlier about the potential for us to do harm if we put this out there and don't follow through. Which I think is part of the reason for students' hesitancy. They've been asked in the past, what do you think? What do you want to do? And have experiences to say that we've asked that question and not followed through on their commitments and their vulnerability. So I just really want to push us all to say, like, these are really important things for us to do, to ask and to follow through on. So we're going to take a little bit of time now. We have about maybe 10 to 12 minutes to break off into some small groups to just spend a little bit of time coming back to what you wrote about initially, about why you're here and what you hope to see, and to kind of jump in a small group discussion about where do you see youth voice and partnership in your organization? What would it look like to effectively partner? Who would be impacted? And what additional knowledge, training, expertise do you need in order to be able to do that work? So just a second, Annalie is going to open up some breakout rooms and send us into a space to have some discussion there. And I'm also just going to drop those questions into the chat so that everybody has them for the breakout rooms.
Okay, you should be good to go.
Thanks, Annalie.
Hey, Annalie, I've got to run here at 2:45, so I'm not going to join, so I'm not disruptive to the breakouts. But good conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I think I might reach out to Kay to see if there's like 20 minutes for you and I just to like mid-series check in and just see
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. Have a good weekend, okay?
All right, you too. Thanks.
Thanks.
To move into our closing. So Jill and Zoe, if you all feel comfortable having people contact you if they have questions, if you're willing to, you could put your email in the chat so folks could reach out to you. But my email and Mark's email are here if people have questions or just want to talk some more about this. We love talking about youth and adult partnerships and would be more than happy to continue the conversation with anyone who's interested. We are running right up to the end like we always do. So we won't take time to write out, but hopefully there are some things that you can carry with you into your work and the organization.